Hello. What an amazing morning. Now, Garden as Well has taken us to some lovely gardens over the year, and this is one of my favourites. I'm back at Powderham Castle, helping my friend Jeanette, who runs this community kitchen garden in the walled garden here. It's a green hub and welcoming to all sorts of people, including me, because I've come and helped her for many years now. But I have to say, this is probably one of the best runner bean harvests that I've ever seen here. Coming up on today's programme, Carol explores a garden that's bursting at the seams with late season colour.
Look at this, isn't it enchanting? It's like being in the middle of a fairy tale or Alice in Wonderland, surrounded by all these beautiful plants.
We visit an extraordinary space providing a haven of peace and tranquility for people recovering from life-changing surgery.
We have paths that are uneven in surface with different cambers, gravel and bark to walk on. It really is a kind of a stepping stone to getting them back to normality, really.
Joe meets a couple who have transformed an urban garden into a lush green paradise.
Roughly in the middle of the garden, or halfway down, is this wonderful sculptural olive, and it's doing an incredible job from a design perspective.
And I am going to be potting up some seedlings for next year, amongst other things. This is the herb garden that Jeanette and I have been planning for years, and finally it is taking shape. Now, this whole garden is about productivity. It's a kitchen garden, and the herb garden is no exception to that. And that's partly informed the design, but I also want it to look really nice as well. So it's just straight rows of beds, which kind of mimics the veg beds that are in the rest of the space, but they're on a different angle, they're diagonal. But the reason for these rows is partly because when Jeanette is harvesting, it's really easy and efficient and quick, but partly also it will hopefully have that look of a Provence field of lavender, but it won't all just be lavender, it's all different kinds of things. So far we have 4 lavenders, which I've already planted up. Lavender is very beautiful and very good for pollinators. This bed here is going to be a row of different sages. They're all culinary, so they're all edible, but they look different, so you can see some are variegated. They might have slightly different flavours, but the idea is that there'll be a lot of variety. And also as a grower, it's always lovely to try different cultivars so that you can see which ones do better in your soil and be informed for future years. I'm really excited about this one particularly. It's called Bergarten. It's not one I've grown before, but apparently it's a mass of blue flowers as well as being edible. So if you wanted just one sage, that might be a really nice one to grow. Good for pollinators, tasty, but also very pretty. So I will be keeping a close eye on this one. Now, the soil here is pretty good, and it's a really hot place against this big brick wall with the sun beating on it and reflecting back on me. So I have absolutely no worries about how all these Mediterranean herbs will do here, even in damp Devon. So I'm not going to add grit or sand or anything like that to the soil. I'm just going to leave it as it is. But what I'm also not going to add is loads of really rich compost and soil improver, because herbs don't like it. They actually like to be a little bit stressed. When they are stressed and when they're hot, they produce more of the volatile compounds that give them their strong smells and their strong flavours, so they'll taste better. So hopefully here, they'll be very happy. I'm just planting them, not proud of the soil, but certainly not deeply. These, although they need quite free draining and warm conditions, are fully hardy, so they can cope with cold winters. But I am planting a few herbs here that, depending on where you are in the country, may not survive outside. Now, the first herb that's a bit tender that I'm planting here is actually, I think, my favourite herb to grow. It's French tarragon. It has such a unique flavour, tarragon. Aniseed-y, fennel-y, and you can't always buy it in the shops. It's really hard to get hold of. So I always grow it myself. What people don't realise is that it's tender. It's really tender, in fact. So here, in a pot, it means it can be moved into the polytunnel or the greenhouse for the winter, and that'll be all it needs. It doesn't need heat for the winter, just frost protection, and then it will grow as a really lovely perennial. What I'm actually planting on here is an old bit of spent compost that was in the bottom of this, which is quite dry and baked, and then I've topped up just about 7 or 8 inches with fresh compost, and that's all that these plants need. They tend to have surface roots that spread outwards rather than deep, and that dried compost will hopefully stop this from getting waterlogged because it doesn't want to get too wet. You could add grit or sand to this compost if you wanted to, but these aren't quite as arid as some of the other Mediterranean herbs, so they're going to be very happy in this, which is just compost. So once all these are in, I'm going to give them a water so that they can establish well, and then that will be the beginning of the herb garden started, finally. Now, Carol visited a garden that is full of colour and also the epitome of right plant, right place.
I've come to Monmouthshire to visit a garden that's got the Black Mountains and the Welsh Hills as a backdrop. Here at Highfield Farm, 3.5 acres has been transformed into a series of gardens, all with their own personality, but all packed full of the plants that I love best, perennials. Well, an unusual entrance into a garden through the chicken shed and down through here in this wonderful gravel garden. It's sunny, it's open, everything's lilting and mixing together, and it all looks splendidly happy. It also looks as though it's doing its own thing. But it wasn't always like this. It's a gravel garden now, but at one time, there was a great big track that ran across here up to the shed. So it meant that the soil either side was extremely compacted, very, very poor indeed, which means that the kind of soil here is very, very free draining. And that's exactly the kind of situation that suits these plants so admirably. Two of the key plants here are this glorious scabious called Ochroleuca, and it's very widespread in the wild right the way across Europe and Asia. I love the way it's mixed with this gaura. This has just got to be one of the prettiest plants ever. This variety is called whirling butterflies, and you can see why. The flowers seem to float over the foliage. In fact, you're not even aware of the stems. It's as pretty as can be, incredibly easy to grow. If you were growing it in rich, fertile soil, then it might only last a winter or two. But this way, it's thriving, and not only thriving, it's seeding all over the place. One of the most exciting qualities about this garden is the way in which perennials are used in so many different ways. This part of the garden, the owners describe as being planted in the matrix style. All that means is like-minded plants are put together with a backbone of grasses through the centre, and then planted with them are these perennials. There are lots and lots of the same perennials which are repeated here and there, not in deliberate swathes or in lines, and they just lead you on. And everything that's planted in here, you can tell, is really enjoying the conditions here and loves the same as its neighbours too. One of the plants that makes these wonderful repeated clumps right the way through the garden are these asters. And I think this has to be my favourite of all. It's a perfect plant. It's Aster fricatii monk. I love its deportment, the way in which all these daisies are quite separate from one another, and none of them conflict or obscure any of the others within the plant. They're all facing the sun. If you listen, you can hear the buzz of the insects, and if you look, you can see just why they're loving this plant. The reason the insects are so interested is because of the formation of this flower and what's inside it. First of all, around the edge, you've got these ray florets, and their whole purpose is to say to the insects, come on, it's over here. And they're drawing the insects in to these centres. The centres are called disc florets. First of all, it looks just like one yellow blob in the middle, but if you look more closely, you can see that it's composed of lots and lots of separate little flowers. And if you watch the insects going around, they'll move right around the inside of the flower, just as each one of these is opening, to taste that nectar and to enjoy that pollen. The daisy family is very well represented in this part of the garden, and no wonder. So many daisies are reliable, accommodating, really straightforward plants. And I think this is one of the most outstanding examples. It's a helenium called Eldorado, and it truly is pure gold. Look at that great golden tutu, and then these lovely knobbly flowers in the middle. There are heleniums too on the other side of the path, and yet another daisy. This one's called Vernonia crinita mammoth, and it runs right the way through the garden, a constant theme. But here, it frames so beautifully the mountain beyond. Look at this, isn't this enchanting? How about this for the perfect picture? This is Selenum wallaceianum. It's the most exquisite of all the umbels. It's got everything going for it. It's got ferny green leaves in the spring that make great big green doilies, and then they're still here, embracing these flowers. And as the flowers come out, they're creamy white in these lovely rounded umbels. But if you look behind me, nobody's helped this to self-seed over there. It's just done it itself. And isn't that the wonder about self-sown plants? They always look as if they landed up in exactly the right place. How about that for a combination? Those beautiful greeny white heads and all that fluffiness surrounded by these big solid yellow daisies of a rudbeckia. It's absolutely brilliant. For me, perennials are the heart and soul of any garden. They change so much, creating different pictures almost day by day. And this garden demonstrates some of the most important factors about perennials: their diversity, their brilliance as far as wildlife is concerned, and also their exquisite beauty.
One of the best things about perennials is also that they're really quite low maintenance for us gardeners, especially when they seed themselves everywhere. But if you don't necessarily want your perennials or your annuals to seed themselves all over your garden, you can take a bit of control by collecting seeds and storing them so that you can choose where they go. And now's the perfect time to do that because the seed heads have matured and the seeds inside will have ripened. Things like poppy seeds are best collected when they have gone brown. If you pick them when they're still green, the seeds will not be viable yet. So the best thing to do is just wait. You can give them a bit of a shake. See if you can hear a rattle inside. It tells you that that is now ready. You might want to leave a few seed heads on for the birds. Some seeds you need to sow pretty much as soon as they've set. Often plants that have evolved in wetlands have very short viability on their seeds, but poppies famously last a very long time. I'm just going to put them straight into an envelope. Now, when you are collecting seed, always wait till a dry, preferably warm and sunny day if you can, because if these have any moisture in them and then you try and store them, they do tend to go a bit mouldy. Oh, there we go, look, there's loads of seed in. Gardening's a very sensory experience, and in this case you just have to keep going until you stop hearing them land. I think they're done. Okay, and then of course, very importantly, label them so you know what they are and when you collected them. Because if a seed doesn't have long viability, you want to know when you need to use them by. And that will give you plenty of poppies for a few years, I would say. And there we go. Keep them somewhere cool and dark and dry. If you don't want to go through all of that hassle of storing and collecting though, you can, with some plants, do something a little bit quicker. This is another favourite plant of mine for collecting seeds from. It's digitalis, or foxglove. And if left here, the seeds will all cascade down and start germinating on the ground here, but I don't necessarily want them here because it's already fairly congested. So instead, I'm going to put them somewhere else, and I'm not going to bother with an envelope this time. They'll just go direct on the ground. I cleared this patch a few weeks ago, so now there's a little bit of a hole, and so next year it'd be lovely to have that filled with lovely foxgloves. So I will just rattle it around and hope that some here germinate. And that will give me flowers in 2 years' time because these are biennials. So if I want flowers for next year, which I do, I need to put some seedlings from this year in here as well. There are foxglove seedlings all through this border. So I'm going to take a few and redistribute them. But they happen to be right next to burdock seedlings, and they look very, very similar. Both have furry leaves. So this is a burdock, this is a foxglove. Both have a sort of rosette at the centre where the growth point is, and both have a purple coloration to that central stalk. The key difference is that the burdock has arrow-shaped leaf, so it's got this shape where the leaf meets the stalk, whereas the foxglove has a spade-shaped leaf, so it gently meets the stem. The other key difference is when you look at an older plant, you'll see that foxglove leaves aren't as big as burdock leaves. They are a real pain, burdock. You can use the roots, but the seeds stick to everything and spread themselves everywhere, so I'd probably dig that one out, whereas I would want the foxgloves to stay. So getting your eye in is really important. As you get to know your plants, this sort of stuff becomes second nature. I'm just gonna dig these seedlings out of the ground and put them straight into a bucket of water and then replant them as soon as I possibly can. I have actually just seen, whilst I'm here, another plant that I can very easily move right now, and that is Verbena bonariensis, which seeds itself everywhere. And the verbenas are right at the front of the bed, although they can be translucent, so they can work in the front. If I put them up and grow them on, I can put them anywhere I like. To identify them as seedlings, they basically look very similar to the parent plant. So they have a square stem, which is often purple in colour, and then they have decusate leaves, which means they have alternately opposite leaves. So one set goes one way, the next set goes at 90 degrees. Quite easy to identify, and I love them. They're one of my favourite flowers, so I always let some be, because part of the joy of verbena is that they seem to come up where they choose and don't ever feel too controlled and contrived. That's the foxgloves in the ground, and I'll pot up the verbena into containers later on today, and until then they'll be absolutely fine in the bucket of water. Now when you ever move seedlings or any kind of plants in this heat, you really have to water them in. So doing that now and then keeping an eye on them for the next few weeks until they've settled. It's a lovely thought knowing that these are going to flower next year. And then the following year, the seeds I scattered will flower. And from then on, hopefully, every year, there will be some foxgloves here in this spot. Now, we all get a bit of respite from our own gardens. But there is one garden in London that is making an enormous difference to people who are recovering from life-changing surgery.
Tranquility, peace, it's brought all those things to me.
This garden helped me heal.
This garden for me is a place to just relax and forget you're in the hospital.
This unit really supports patients who've experienced an amputation to get back onto the road to recovery, to regain their independence. And this garden really plays a really important role in them being able to do that. This is the Amputee Rehabilitation Unit, which is part of Guy's and St Thomas's Trust. It's in Lambeth, South London. I'm Joe Scoble and I'm the head gardener here, but I also work as a rehabilitation assistant as well. Let me help you with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you've experienced an amputation, it's a life-changing event. It can obviously have an effect on your mental health. Right, are you happy?
Yeah, I'm comfortable
Should we
now.
put you on a slight angle like that? Is that okay? When you come out into the garden, you notice that people relax. They can practice with their wheelchair outside, they can practice with their prosthetic. It's important for someone's mood. We've got some different paths here that are set up especially for training with a prosthesis. So we have paths that are uneven in surface with different cambers, gravel and bark to walk on. It really is a kind of a stepping stone to getting them back to normality, really.
I use my imagination to create this beautiful design here. Thumbs up. My name is Tatiana. My passion is dancing, so dancing kizomba, which is an African dance from Angola in Africa. And I went there because I wanted to improve myself, and I unfortunately contracted severe malaria. To save my life, they had to amputate my arms and my legs. I'm a very positive person, so that didn't scare me much, really. I just wanted to get on my life and try to figure out how I can dance again. When I arrived here, everything changed on the first day. From not being able to move to finally being able to move, it was amazing. It's a great feeling. Yeah, just being outside the garden was really something peaceful and something to get your mind out of your own room and then what happened to you. It was just a feeling of freedom.
So we have plants from all around the world here, and they are plants that can cope with the quite dry, hot environment of London. This is a Mexican lily, which has a really interesting large flower that comes up in the spring, which develops on the mature plant. We've got the rice paper plant, the Tetrapanax. We got this large Miscanthus giganteum. We got plants such as this one here, which is the Octavia carnea, which is from the slopes of the Andes. The Australian indigo just behind us. You've got the lancewood from New Zealand, quite unusual looking trees. So we've got plants that perhaps you wouldn't normally see in people's gardens. That's fine.
Yeah.
What we've come to realise is that you can take rehabilitation out into the garden using hand tools in the garden. We perhaps take it for granted, but somebody who's just learning to use a prosthesis and is maintaining their balance has to think about what they're doing a little bit more carefully. So these tasks really help them to really progress with their balance and their confidence. Big or small?
I reckon the Big Daddy. Let's go with
Daddy.
that. Yeah. My name's Luke. I've been here about 6 weeks now. I was on a motorbike trip driving from the US down to Antarctica. Unfortunately, only made it as far as Colombia, where I crashed. I was there for about a month in hospital and then was repatriated back to England. Arrived in this Oasis. Do you put your foot on it?
I would just use your strength if you can. Shove it in hard and then lift.
It's just so different to being in a hospital bed to coming in here. It's just nice that it's separate. That's what's important. I've had my leg for about 2 weeks, and the first week was pretty savage, trying to get used to walking on it, and now I feel like I've got a bit of independence back. It's much harder to walk on this soil than it is on normal ground, but I think it's quite good for the balance. If you can walk on soil, I reckon you can have a good go on the London path. Right, this is where I fall in the ditch.
Don't fall in the ditch.
Being out in the garden, I get used to actually hobbling around on my leg and working out how to go up things and down things, and when something throws me off balance, I can come back to the centre. So it's incredibly useful. Do you know what, this is the best physio session I've had. If you want to stand up, do it with the rake.
Right, we've got sage. These two are mint, Corsican mint, and then we're going to plant mint up there. My name's Christine. I came to the centre after having my leg amputated about 4 months ago now. I had a bypass in my leg because the arteries were furred up. I was very depressed, cried every time someone spoke to me because it is overwhelming. Now, even now, I sort of it's just peaceful to sit out here. You collect your mind. You feel a bit calmer when you go in, you know. Hopefully, I'm going home next week. So, but I won't. Well, I'll miss him and I'll miss the garden. Yeah.
The sunlight is so important, isn't it, for our immune system? And so bringing patients out into the open and to enjoy the outdoor space, I think that's really important when it comes to the future of providing healthcare.
Taking care of the garden gave me a sense of having my independence back, and it's a start of my life really, because I stayed in here for 6 months, and after that it's like being outside, like in a real world, we'd say. And then being ready to have my own little garden. When I'm taking care of my plant, I just forget about things. I just forget about the world around me. I just want to be there with them, and I love it. I'm so grateful to be able to do that, and it's nice.
I just can't imagine what that kind of trauma must feel like, and it's so lovely to know that there are places and people and, of course, gardens that can help. Now, I'm going to help a little bit with Jeanette's brassicas, because this year has been quite a challenge with them. I know you've been struggling with the brassicas this year, haven't you, Jeanette?
I've lost probably 50%. My brassicas have been assaulted by wood pigeons, and then as the year went on, the white cabbage butterfly caterpillar. But I haven't done anything to harm them in any way other than put covers over my brassicas.
Okay. You've netted some crops.
I have.
Yeah.
There are a couple I've noticed that's got holes in the leaves, so even though I'm using netting to cover them, something is laying on them. It just seems that the white butterfly is doing particularly well.
Particularly at Powderham
Yeah,
Castle.
that's right. Especially in my garden. This is some purple sprouting broccoli. I do find that once you get past the baby stage, they get the strength then just to grow on and grow out of it, as long as nothing has taken out the growing tip.
Okay. Are they going to stay uncovered?
They're sort of getting stronger and more mature, and also we're going into autumn, so it's not quite such cabbage butterfly weather.
Having said all of that, and I know like it's immensely frustrating when you're a grower and your crop isn't doing that well, but the serious element is that insects in general and butterflies this year have done incredibly badly. I think on the big counts this year they found that it was nearly 50% down on numbers this year from last.
Yeah.
And we as gardeners can avoid using... Sorry, I'm just going to chase that one off your purple sprouting. We can avoid using pesticides and chemicals, and we can grow as much flower and pollinator-friendly crops as possible and actually make a bit of a difference.
I've adopted permaculture principles here, which I'm absolutely wedded to, and so I don't use chemicals at all. I just try so hard to work with nature, you know, creating a place that's diverse for our insects. And so when I am weeding, I just tend to lay them down on the paths and just leave them to rot down. If we sort of poked around underneath, we'll probably find some lovely big fat worms.
If you didn't have a good biodiversity with, like you say, worms and beetles and wasps and flies and bacteria that break down this stuff, you'd never get the good soil from it. You know, by doing things like having log piles in the corner or piling up leaves or letting long grass or weeds live in one area to support lots of different species, you're then allowing those species to act on your garden and make your garden better.
Yeah.
So we're weeding around these purple sprouting now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm back in a few weeks so we can see how they've done.
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
Still to come on today's programme. Jo explores a beautiful garden in London that has been designed to be both low maintenance and wildlife friendly.
What a beautiful garden.
Aw.
Honestly, it's absolutely gorgeous.
So we wanted it to be low maintenance because we don't have time to weed, to water.
And we meet a mother and daughter team who create unusual displays using reclaimed containers and houseplants.
I'm a plantaholic, I confess. Yeah, and it's not going to change.
Likewise, I live and breathe plants.
Well, if there's one plant that grows abundantly in this garden, probably too abundantly, it's comfrey. It can be a little bit of a thug, but it is incredibly useful for making fertilizer that feeds all of the other plants. That's what I'm going to do with them a bit. I am wearing gloves through this whole process, and that's because comfrey is covered in very fine hairs that can really irritate your skin. Come on, Ree. Well, the most famous thing about comfrey feed is its terrible smell that will fill your whole allotment or garden. But this way avoids the smell. It's very simple. This is just an old water butt, which was lying around here. And all I'm going to do is put the comfrey leaves in dry, not add any water, and then weigh them down. And that's literally it. And by leaving out the water, so you're removing the stagnation, and it just doesn't smell nearly as bad. In fact, it doesn't smell at all bad. But it's such a fantastic resource. I mean, you can use anything. You can use all sorts of green material that you have because they will all be full of nutrients. The thing about Comfrey is it's very full of potassium, and that's because its roots go deep into the soil where they can bring up all of the potassium that other plants can't access. And that's perfect for flowering and fruiting plants, whereas things like nettles are really high in nitrogen, and that's better for leafy crops. So then, once you've filled it, all you need to do is really firm it down to get all the air out, and then weigh it down with a rock. And then leave it. There we go. And in about 6 to 8 weeks, you'll have some liquid feed coming out of this. And the lovely thing about having it in a water butt is eventually you'll be able to just open the tap and the liquid will come out. And you'll keep adding leaves and leaves and leaves. And so you'll have a pretty much constant source of liquid fertilizer here. And you can see it's a little bit thicker and darker Comfrey feed than your normal Comfrey tea, and it is more intense as well, so about twice the dilution, so 1 in 20 rather than 1 in 10 when you are feeding with this. But by liquid feeding any plant, you're making the nutrients really accessible to it, but that will be perfect for feeding all kinds of things. I recently got my own house, so I know exactly how daunting it is to design and create your own garden, especially working with whatever was there already. But Jo went to visit a couple in London who have done just that and created a real oasis in our capital city.
I think a garden can add so many things to your life. It can connect you with nature, be somewhere to be really creative in, and who knows, bring back some wonderful childhood memories too. And this garden does all of those things and more, and it does it beautifully. Impressively, it was designed by its owners Paula Siqueira and Andrew Durham, who knew just what they wanted. What a beautiful garden.
Aww.
Honestly, it's absolutely gorgeous.
So we wanted it to be low maintenance because we don't have time to weed, to water. So laying the gravel is the major part of it, you know. We also wanted a place where we could relax and remind me at home as well, because I'm from Brazil.
Okay.
And we obviously wanted it to be a mix between British culture and Brazilian culture. I'm from the middle of the country where it's dry throughout 6 months and then rain non-stop throughout 6 months. And having the fresh water softening the gravel and the harshness of it was a massive element to remind me of home.
So Andrew, what was the garden like when you first came here?
Well, straight away, we fell in love with the space. We had maybe 8 trees here. Quite a lot of them were in bad shape, but it had also some beautiful elements like this amazing wall of ivy. It's such a great element to have.
Not only did they design the structure and the planting, they built most of the garden themselves too, with a lot of graft.
Now, looking back, I think it's like giving birth. You don't remember how much work and pain it was.
The garden is long and thin, 7 metres by 29, and cleverly divided into areas. But the water near the house is key. One of the things that Paula and Andrew inherited was this large pond, and I guess most people would think, I'm going to get rid of that. It's a bit scary to maintain, but it adds so much to this garden. It's absolutely beautiful. But also the water, they don't fill it up from the tap. It all comes off the roofs and they harvest it, and it's all natural water going into this pond. They've divided it into two. There's a really deep part on this side, and on this side it's much shallower with gravel and marginal plants. And also it's a beach, so it's great for wildlife too. And the wildlife is just flocking here. There's damselflies, there's dragonflies, and on these reed mace over here, a lot of people call them bulrushes. They're the casements of the old dragonflies that have emerged and flown off. And honestly, this is just so magical to have this in your garden in the centre of London on a day like this. It's fabulous. And in this low maintenance garden, it's cleverly placed plants that create the different areas. Roughly in the middle of the garden, well, halfway down, is this wonderful sculptural olive, and it's doing an incredible job from a design perspective, because from the house it screens this back part of the garden. From this side it's screening the house and creating that sense of seclusion in this fire pit area. It's fantastic. And by placing it here and not surrounding it with lots of plants and cluttering it up, it's like living sculpture. It's majestic. At the beginning of this project, a lot of trees were taken away. Well, left on site actually, but reinvented as habitats and places to sit and dotted around the garden. But new trees were put in, and trees much more appropriate for a smaller garden. Here, I love this mini sort of stylised birch grove. We've got 3 trees set out in a triangle, and as they grow, they'll grow together as one nice big clump. And when they drop their leaves, of course, in autumn, you've got these wonderful white stems, a really lovely composition. And from a design perspective, they're important too, because on this side, we've got that large ivy, we've got the olive as well. And without these here balancing the garden out, it would all feel very lopsided. There's not much colour in the garden. The interest comes from the texture and shape of the fabulous planting. But there's one central bed. It's actually the old pond that was filled with recycled garden rubble and soil, and it sits beautifully in this simple but clever space. There's a lovely continuity to this garden, and I think that's because there's just 2 materials used throughout really. We've got timber and gravel. So we've got this deck and these lovely floating sleeper steps, and the railway sleepers are cut into random sizes and dotted through as stepping stones through the path. It creates a lovely meandering feel through the garden. And as with all garden design, the detail will take good design and elevate it to an excellent design. And there's one last experience here I just can't resist. Oh, this is beautiful, I've got to say. And to think this is low maintenance, it's environmentally friendly, buzzing with wildlife, and it's beautiful too. They've achieved so much in this small garden, I've got to say. And you can cool yourself down on a hot day. What more do you want?
I really love that garden, and I think to have done it themselves and yet be so pared back and careful in editing their choices made for a really successful design, which I know many people, including myself, struggle to do by always overfilling things. Now, autumn is a really good time for dividing perennials. You can do it with all sorts of things. But here, Jeanette has a clump of garlic chives that she doesn't want here, so I'm gonna dig these up and put them into smaller pots. And the reason why autumn is the best time for it is because it's quite mild. We usually have quite a lot of rain, so things can be watered in and recover more quickly. But also there's still a little bit of warmth, so there's some time for these plants to recover, put on more roots before the really cold season begins. Come on then, Ruth. Division is probably the easiest form of propagation, and that's because basically all you're doing is digging up a clump of plant, prizing it apart and then potting up smaller pieces. And it's particularly easy with these because they're bulbs. I am reusing the pots that the herbs came in. Let's put a bit of peat-free compost in the pot. Get the plants into the centre if you can, and then top up. You could plant these straight into the borders if you wanted to, like I did with the digitalis. Putting them in a pot is quite a good way of making them recover quickly. And also in compost, they can put on stronger root systems. So a pot of compost is probably more reliable. You can do this with any sort of herbaceous perennial. At this time of year, you can go through the whole herbaceous border if you want to and break things up. Things like astrantia, hemerocallis, hardy geraniums, all can be divided now. The only things that you wouldn't want to divide in the autumn would be things like grasses, which can take a bit longer to recover, especially when it's cold and wet, or anything that's in flower. Okay. And I am also going to pot up the verbena seedlings that I dug up from the border earlier on. The key to success with division or anything like this repotting is good root contact with the soil and then water them. It's really, really important, even in the autumn, even when it's rainy, to water plants that you've recently divided, because without water, the roots actually can't touch the soil, and it's that contact with the soil that allows them to take up nutrients. There we go. A verbena seedling and some garlic chives. Now, if you want to still flex your gardening muscles but don't actually have a garden, there are loads of houseplants and indoor gardens that you can make. And nowadays, being so popular, people are coming up with more and more inventive ways of displaying their houseplants.
I'm a plantaholic, I confess. Yep, and it's not going to change.
Likewise, I live and breathe plants. The pleasure and joy of houseplants for me is actually seeing them thrive, and particularly when we're doing like mixed container planters and you can fit multiple houseplants in one container. It creates a mini garden that you can enjoy in your home and actually brings the outside in. My name's Holly.
I'm Nikki, Holly's mum.
And together we love creating indoor container gardens. The plants have to live harmoniously.
The rule of thumb is plants that are compatible together and that require the same light situation, same amount of watering, when and how often.
And actually the speed of growth is one going to dominate and push out the other one. By the plants being so closely planted in one container, they're almost mimicking their natural environment, whether they're a crawling, trailing plant or they've got an upright habit. They kind of intermingle and we can kind of try and recreate that environment in one pot to get the best out of the plants. So this is one of my favourite planting combinations for a low light position in the home. We have got a Ficus elastica, a rubber plant, darker leaf. You've got a Fatsia japonica, a Muhlenbeckia, a Dracaena, and my favourite plant in this planter is the Maranta fascinator. It has to be. It's got beautiful red veins. It's a moving plant. It moves with the light throughout the day, and you'll also get beautiful flowers. My love of houseplants and our passion for vintage containers definitely evolved and was inspired by Mum. It was almost impossible not to be around plants. I didn't know any different. Mum would always take us to a local garden centre or shop. That's what we did.
Part of the holidays, wasn't it?
It was part of the holidays, part of the weekends. Plants has just always been there.
Squidger in the car,
Yeah.
amongst all the plants.
Yeah.
There's not as better feeling as when you're titivating with all your house plants, giving them a drink or giving
New
them
leaf.
a duft. Oh,
A new
and when you
leaf
see a
coming.
new leaf,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that's the lottery, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I'm going to plant a planter that can go inside and outside.
Okay.
And what are you doing?
Well, I came across this old vintage wash basin and I'm going to plant that up with houseplants, pet friendly. So I'm going to start, Holly. I
Yep.
think I might use the bird's nest
Yeah.
fern. So I have put drainage holes in mine.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. Next, I'm going to use a Calathea orbifolia, and I just love the foliage on this one. Reminds me of a melon.
A little bit, yeah. So we're going to start with a Sansevieria. This is going to be my centre point, and this is going to go right in the middle. Snake plants actually can go in a low lit position in the home, but because we're going to mix it with succulents, the whole arrangement will need to be in a brighter position, and it will actually live really well and you'll get more growth. I'm going to top dress with gravel because we've got succulents and they don't want to be swamped with wet soil. If you did overwater, the gravel's going to help with drainage, and aesthetically it just pairs better with succulent and cacti.
So, Holly, I think I've finished.
Looks great.
And in the bathroom, it's going to be the perfect place for it because of the humidity.
We're just going to add some crock broken terracotta pots. Everybody has broken terracotta pots, and these are going to go in as finishing touches to almost look like we've planted lots of individual succulents.
And it looks like they're bursting out the pot.
So this lovely succulent Sansevieria combination will sit really well in a kitchen space. Plenty of light, a nice soft light. It will live very happily, won't
You
it?
will, yeah.
I would say having a shared bond and a shared passion for plants with Mum is...
Never a dull moment.
It's never a dull moment, but I would say it's very, very special. We've got this bond that only we know. It's a mum and daughter thing.
I love Holly and Nikki's work. I think it's beautiful. It's so much more inspiring than just a pot in a little drip catcher. Right, now it is harvest time of year. And if you're anything like me, you will find that you probably don't manage to eat it all when it's fresh, and you need to find ways of preserving some of it for the winter. And one thing that I tend to do is make vinegars. So I'm going to make one now, which is called fire cider vinegar. It's very simple. It's things like garlic. I've got some horseradish root. You could use ginger, you could use turmeric. And I've got a chilli because fire cider is fiery, but you can put whatever you fancy in. Letting that infuse for a couple of months until the vinegar has taken on the flavour and some of the properties of all of those plants. And with anything like this, you want it to infuse as much as possible. So you want as small pieces as you can get. And there are no set ingredient numbers. It's basically as much as you can be bothered to do. So as long as nothing's sticking out above the vinegar, anything above the surface runs the risk of going bad. Now I like this really fiery. I like chilli, so I'm going to use all the seeds and all the material up the top, which is where you get the strongest chilli effect. I could do even more of this, but after a few months this will still be fairly punchy. And the most punchy part of it is the horseradish root. Fire cider vinegar is not for everyone. I really like it, and I tend to have a spoonful a day. You could mix it with olive oil and put it on salad, something like that. fire-cider vinegar. It's sometimes called Four Thieves vinegar, and the story goes that it dates back to the plague, when some thieves were stealing from plague houses and not getting ill. And when they were finally caught, they gave the recipe of how they were managing to stay alive, and this is it. So it uses loads of antibacterial, antifungal and antiviral botanicals, so things like the garlic. But also I'm adding lots of herbs, and thyme is one of those plants that has a lot of those properties as well, along with things like sage and rosemary. So I'm putting some of those in too. And then some winter savoury, which is one of my favourite herbs. It has that same flavour as thyme, but it's a lot easier to grow because thyme can be a little bit temperamental. So hopefully all of these together will taste really, really nice. And now, a good shake. There. And that should infuse really nicely. So I'll put this somewhere dark and cool, leave it for a couple of months, and then it'll be ready just about in time for Christmas to strain off and give people as gifts, if you do it soon.
Summer squashes can be productive for many months, but now it's a good time to cut the ends off any long growing shoots so that the plant's energy goes into swelling the remaining fruit. Harvest regularly when they have a firm but soft skin, and you should be able to do this right up until the first frosts. Providing extra food is a great way to attract more birds into your garden. You can use a ready-made seed mix in a traditional feeder, mealworms, or seed heads that you've collected. Or simply cut an apple. Ensure you hang your feeder high enough off the ground to avoid predators, and then sit back and enjoy the show. It's not too late to sow hardy annuals, such as calendula, for an early flowering next year. Either scatter seeds directly where you want them to flower, or sow into plugs. Put 2 seeds into each module that you have filled with a peat-free compost, then cover lightly. Water well before putting somewhere warm to germinate.
Well, I've had a lovely day because I feel like I've achieved quite a lot actually, which is a very good feeling, especially in a garden that you love. But that's it for me. I'm off home. Monty is back at Longmeadow next week at 8 p.m. But until then, goodbye.